Hi guys, welcome to the Starry Night Inside podcast. I'm Carla. This podcast is all about spirituality, psychic work, mediums, people who connect to the other side or do modality work where they help people connect between this realm and the other, and just giving our insight and just what that experience is like and what we see and observe through the people we serve. And today I have Dana, who is a very multifaceted person with a lot of interesting experiences we're going to be talking about today.
Hi, Carla.
Hi, Dana.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming. So you've had a creative career leading up to this point where you moved into death doula work, and it's really interesting. And I wanted to hear a little bit about how you got from one space to the other, and just some of what you went through even to get to that point.
Yeah, so I haven't left my creative space to do the death doula work. As being a creative, I've always loved helping people express themselves. I've always been super interested in the psychology of when you feel, let's say you're at your lowest point of trying to make something happen, right? Mm-hmm. And you just feel so sad and you feel like nothing's really working and you have this immense sense of creative block. That in itself is also a transition. You're going through these different levels, these different transitions in your creative space, headspace. And I've always loved helping others process that. As my background, I wouldn't say my family was generally like super creative because growing up from a Korean household, usually your parents are like, you need to grow up and become a doctor or a lawyer. And I just didn't have that in me. That side of my brain wasn't really working, even though I do love science. As a kid, growing up in a cultural upbringing where your parents are like, what exactly is art? What is graphic design? What are you going to do with your life? Like, how is that going to bring home the bacon? Yeah, it's kind of sad being the black sheep of the family, but I also love that. I loved that I could have freedom of expression. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is also a transition, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So anytime you self-express, you get into that self-expression state, I feel like you're just constantly letting things go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so every opportunity that came into my hands was obviously something that I've created, but also I feel like the opportunities have been manifested, and I've always believed that there was a higher power where I knew that there is always help.
Yes, I believe that too. And I believe in reincarnation too, and I just feel like
that's a whole other thing.
That's right? A whole other thing, yeah, I know. I can go into that later.
Yeah, for sure. a whole other podcast about that. Yeah, and so I wanted to become a fine artist, but then I was also into the industry of packaging, which is everything that you see and touch and use. I mean, why do you even buy stuff, right? Sometimes we buy things, even like wine. You go to the store and you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to buy, but ooh, this is pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, that was earlier on. But I think, the people are smart now, so that we know what we want and we don't stop until we get it. So,
yes.
Yeah, and I love the practicality of how do you come up with a solution? Like, my ultimate goal as a designer is to bring solutions because there's always a problem to something.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of these things that are made that we use right now, it's there because there's a problem to it.
Yes.
Right? So that is one thing that has really guided me into the world of design and creativity. And leading up to it, as many of us go through transitions in life, breakups, parents, divorcing, not being able to get the job you want, or you're still waiting, or there's just so many things that we're in transition. And there's the physical death, ambiguous death, and that's Could range from a death of a dream, death of a marriage, death of just things that aren't like in the physical realm. And it was fascinating for me because we go through this every day. We are potentially grieving every day.
But I've realized that. I've noticed that, like, if I have to end a friendship, I'm like, wow, I feel like this person has died. Even though they're still alive. And I'm like, this is such a weird concept. Like, it's weird to even acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And it's a weird feeling as well. And that's something you must experience a lot, that, you know, in this work too. Like, I feel like when you're helping people, there's probably more than just the loss of a person. There's probably a lot they're also grieving along with it too.
Absolutely. We grieve every day. At the same time, we distract ourselves every day. There's another pandemic that's going on right now that's an internal pandemic, which is we try to cover up grief.
Yes.
Cover by, let's say, if you're going through a really heartbreaking time, and you know deep inside that you have to heal and you need to do that and sit with it kind of alone. And the distractions of that is you're dating other people just to kind of fill the space. You're going out every weekend. You're, you know, perhaps it's drugs, perhaps it's other form of addiction. Maybe it's food, maybe it's overdoing exercise, whatever it is. I think it's really hard for a lot of us to really sit in that pain.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that too. Like, people run from pain in every other direction, and we're taught as a society too that negative emotions, pain, like, that's not socially acceptable to even acknowledge or look at. And then as a result, people are suffering. And I think most suffering just comes from trying to avoid the pain of life that we all inherently go through. And honestly, like, when you sit in that pain, the answers that come are things that you cannot get from anything else. The knowledge your soul develops, the way you feel when you really understand things, it's like you feel like a new person afterwards. It changes you in so many ways, and it just changes you for the better. I had a dream last night, and at the end of the dream, it was about you, and at the end of the dream I got told death and ascension are the same thing. And then I woke up. But I was like, oh, that's so true. And I felt like I had to bring that up for this. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was really cool. And I was like, it's true, because when any aspect of you dies, like if you end a friendship, a marriage, a job, a career field, anything that you're leaving behind, you're ultimately like grieving yourself. You know, and I think when people die, you're still grieving yourself in a way, because you're grieving your relation to them and who you were when you were with them.
Absolutely. And it's not necessarily just the job, just the marriage, just the career. It's parts of you that you are leaving, that parts of you that unfortunately has to die with the death of that.
Yeah.
And I have to come back to point out that nobody wants to sit in pain. Why would I want to do that when I can just cover it up or do whatever it is that's going to make me feel happy in the moment, right?
Yeah.
But what we're really, I think, trying to aim at is making sure that it doesn't become a pattern, that we're not going through this cyclical pattern of, okay, I went through that, came out unscathed because I went and did this. I distracted myself through so-and-so.
Yeah.
Then you come across the same situation, but it's just either a different face, a different job, right?
Yes.
And that only happens if you don't sit through that.
Yeah. It's sitting with pain. If you don't, it becomes a pattern, and it's your coping mechanisms become the pattern, and that's where addictions form. It's like, I run from this and I go here. And when it becomes a knee-jerk reaction, and that's your go-to, pain, I think, builds on top of it. I don't think it even stays. I think it gets worse. And it's because it's the universe's way of saying, you have to look at this. You can't keep running. You have to confront the thing that you're hiding in.
Yeah.
Or the thing that you're running and hiding to. Like, there's a deeper reason for it, and you have to look at that, because if you don't, it will keep repeating itself. And that's really what karma is. I believe karma is, you have coping mechanisms, you have ways of dealing with situations, and it's not even always something you do. It could be things that you say, it can be ways that you act out. But if you don't look at those things, they become your karma, because then you find people that will do those things to mirror it back to you, because then the universe is saying, like, hey, like, not only are you coping this way, but now we're going to start showing it back to you, just to get you to break out of that karma, because it's really keeping you trapped.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't want to scare anybody off to a lot of what, is out there. We can say it's therapy talk, we can say it's woo-woo talk, and say, like, this is karma, and karma's gonna bite your ass.
Yeah,
like, you don't do this.
Oh, I know. I don't want to do that either. Yeah.
But I think the idea is, when we're going through such hard times, when we're going through transitions, what we don't want to do is cover it up, right?
Yes.
Because let's say you're just covering up poop. I just had an like a bubble image of, like, my cat just covering up his poop, but
I'm thinking my rabbits.
Right?
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
Until someone else is gonna have to go and clean up your shit.
It's a great analogy.
Like, it just feels like I have to do that. I mean, obviously, animals can't do that.
Right.
Like, let's bring it back to the human experience. If I don't do it, that's also, I want to talk so much later about accountability.
Yeah, yes.
But yeah, it's like, I have to do it. You have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, how every circumstance or every situation is a mirror. Every person you encounter, every situation that you feel triggered by is a mirror. But yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah, and it's all about just getting yourself into alignment. Like, there's nothing scary at the end of it. There's no punishment. It's just saying, like, you're not in alignment, and hey, so we're going to be mirroring back some of these coping mechanisms, just to help kind of steer you back in the right direction, so that you can ultimately continue to grow. Yeah. So it's really just to help you kind of promote growth, more than promoting punishment or anything negative like that.
Right. Bringing all of this back to grief work.
Yes.
Culturally, when there's a death in the family, my background, I'm part Korean, Japanese, Hawaiian. I'm like a cocktail. I realized when my grandparents were passing away, my mom, I think she was in complete shock, or whatever it was almost as if, like, oh, okay, like, let's just do the funeral, and then this, and then this, and then that, and then we do the wake, and then whatever it is. Like, it was just one thing after another, and no one really acknowledged anyone's feelings. And as a kid, I found that I was like, oh my gosh, is this okay? Am I okay to cry?
Oh,
but I didn't know how to act, because there was no reaction from my parents. But I mean, every culture is different.
Right.
There's a difference of, like, how we celebrate one's life after they pass. And then there's a way where how we express when someone passes. So I was just extremely interested in that part, like, in a more cultural experience of how people process grief. And then as I was getting a little bit older, and I've been experiencing grief where I've had friends pass from COVID. I've had numerous amounts of breakups that felt like a death, right? Well,
yes.
In a sense, they are.
Yeah.
I've seen friends go through their forms of death. I just kind of felt empathic towards that kind of sadness, right? Towards their grief as well. So yeah, grief has been, it's everywhere. And I think they get a really bad rep.
Yeah, I think so too, but it's a part of life.
It is. It's the one thing that's all guaranteed for us is death and grief, right? It's just how we have to. I think my advocacy here is, I want to let others know that there are resources out there for you to process grief.
What kind of processes do you recommend? What have you seen really work for people?
If you are seeing a therapist of some sort, cognitive, behavioral, hypno, right?
Yes.
You can talk to them about, okay, like I want to process this. One thing is about communicating that is like, I think I'm grieving and I don't know how to grieve. That's a step.
Okay, yes.
And you can say that to friends, your family, or whoever you feel really safe with, I would say.
Yeah. And when do you find that people have an easy time or a hard time even telling people that they're grieving and even receiving care back when they're looking for that kind of support? Because I feel like a lot of us don't know how to support those who are grieving because it's kind of taboo to really talk about.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a wonderful segue into death doulaship.
Yes.
A death doula, much like a birth doula, is someone who helps bring life into this world, right? But different than a doctor would do because it's done in a more holistic manner. You're not just like, here, let me cut the cord and wrap the baby up, make sure the baby is crying, slap them around a little bit, make sure, it's just very like a little bit scientific in the sense, or it's more procedural, I would say. A birthing doula would maybe go and I'm not exactly 100% sure, so please don't quote me on this, but perhaps they tend to the mother a little bit more with more holistic care. So then in the form of a death doula is very different than a hospice volunteer, where it's, I would say, like a person who is there to hold a lot of space. Our job is not to give advice, or almost like, when you're really close to a friend, your first instinct when they're going through a hard time is, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
I understand. Everything's going to be okay. That's like our initial reaction, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that you would think what a death doula possibly would do through a person who understands that they are dying. However, we would never understand that. We would never understand their world. We'll never understand, they're not going to be okay. They're going to die.
Yeah.
So we're not really there to be like, I understand, you're going to be okay. You're strong. You can get through this. That's not our job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that what? Because I feel like a lot of us go through things where our friends need us or people in our life need us for grieving something, as hard as death, and then we don't know. Do you have any advice for people that are like, well, I have a friend or I have a person in my life that's going through that and I don't know how to show up for them?
Yeah, I think the first is to have a conversation with them and ask, how can I be there for you? Because I think what we normally do is we almost inject ourselves to thinking this is what's probably best for them. We are perhaps act on what would be best for that person without knowing what's best for that person. My experience as an end of life doula, that goes hand in hand. I'm not there to let them know, hey, like, okay, you have 3 months to live. This is what you should be doing.
Yes.
They could say, I don't want you here. I don't know why you're here.
Wow.
Families would also say, I don't know why you're here. I don't think this is helpful at all.
Oh, wow.
In that sense, it's very difficult to hold that kind of space. It's a whole different space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hard to, if they don't want you to show up, and how do you offer support if they're like, they don't want you there? If they're like, this isn't helping.
From my experience, we say, that's absolutely okay. And sometimes, a lot of the times, it's you're sitting there in silence. Because when they would say, like, I want you here, it could be true. However, most of the time is that they really like it when there's someone there. Knowing they don't have to physically say, I really just would like you to sit next to me, but without saying that.
Okay.
And me being able to be there is enough. In some cases, if you have a prognosis of 1 year, then you have time to prepare versus a super sudden death. Those are the hardest, I think. When someone goes through a sudden death, the hardest is when you're with the family.
Oh, wow.
And they are trying to process as best as they can. I think how my creativity comes in terms of doing this death doulaship is helping them with their legacy.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
How do you establish what the legacy is? And who decides that? Does the person who passed away, did they decide it before they go? Or did the family decide, hey, here's what we feel like your legacy has been for us?
When I am hired as an end-of-life caregiver to the person who is dying, it is up to them.
Okay.
First, it would be, would you like to have a legacy project? Considering you have this many weeks, months, years left.
Yeah.
And that can range from a voice recording to their loved ones, to putting together a photo album, to, let's say they were like, I want to leave a blanket to my grandchild, right? And like that would be me helping them get those resources together. There's just so many projects out there, and it's different for every single person.
Yes.
Yeah. Found personally for me the most rewarding is I'm able to help leave these beautiful, memorable legacy projects. It's just been very sobering.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I love that. And does the family have a say in what the person leaves? Do they leave it as a surprise? How does that kind of work?
That really depends on the person. I mean, I think they could leave it as a surprise. Sometimes they could, sometimes it's like really like a movie or like a storybook. They'll say, I want to leave this and I want my grandchild to open this letter like every birthday, every year on the same day.
Aww.
Or I would like to leave this voice recording to my son 6 months from now.
Oh, wow.
So it really just depends on the person, what it means to them.
Yeah. What about for people that don't have families? What kind of legacy do they end up deciding to leave for people?
That's a great question. Death doulas play a huge role in a person who unfortunately has a lack of support or family around them, and they have to go through it alone. Mm-hmm. Can you even imagine going through living all of your life, that journey, and then at the end, you're alone?
Yeah. It's hard.
And so it's really nice to hear them talk about what kind of legacy they would like to leave. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes they don't want to leave anything. Sometimes it's a whole arrangement. So it really does depend on the person. And I don't think these end-of-life caregivers, there's enough awareness about them. I just really love that there's support.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially being so into the processing of grief, because it is not, and you know this, it's not linear. You can be crying for years and one day it hits you like that.
Yes. And do the families and friends and community come back later? Do people come back later and say, hey, now I'm having a hard time grieving? Like, maybe it didn't hit them at first, but like you said, months or like a year later, all of a sudden it hits them. Do they ever come back and then they ask for some way from you of helping kind of walk through some of those emotions or processing some of that?
I haven't experienced that on my journey just yet, but I know that is an availability for sure.
Oh, that's really great.
I think the resources are there, there's support.
Yeah.
So it's really glad that we're talking about it.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's an important subject, and I think, it scares a lot of people, or they're, just nobody wants to think about that. But at the end of the day, I think it's still it's an important part of life, because the legacy you leave behind, I think, is one of the most important things about your life that you can hold, because that leaves an imprint on people long after you're gone.
100%. The biggest takeaway from all this grief work and the awareness and spreading the word about how, don't be so afraid of death. It's coming to us all.
Yeah.
It's one thing that we all have in common. Everything is impermanent.
Yeah.
And it should be, and I don't like saying that word, but it should be super sobering.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you go through, some kind of sickness, if you kind of witness something and, either yourself or maybe that was a reality for you where you realize like this is temporary or you see that through somebody else, I think you start taking all those little things. You have gratitude for the things you took for granted before. And it does, I think it creates an appreciation for all the small things in life that none of us think to take appreciation for. It's all these like small things too.
It's very deep, and a lot of us, when we talk about death, has to be, it's so scary, and why would you want to talk about something so morbid? Or it's not so much the death. I mean, we already know, like, whether we die young or old or out of sickness or whatnot, it's gonna be there.
Yeah.
What I want people to be aware about the most is how are you living? Because you already know death is coming. So, as sober as that should make you, how are you living? Like, are you holding on to grudges? Are you, poisoning yourself through distractions? Are you poisoning yourself through the anger and resentment that you have towards one another? Like,
that's such a great point.
Yeah.
And what would you recommend for people where they have that wake up call of like, wow, like I'm so upset and I'm holding on to so many negative emotions towards things that I'm not, I'm not gonna look back and be proud of some of this stuff, or I'm gonna look back and wish I had made different choices. Like, how do you kind of re-navigate that? Because I think people also have this opinion, and it kind of goes back to like avoiding pain too. But like, if you do take on negative coping mechanisms or not deal with hardship in a great way, people feel like you can't come out of that again. And I think that that's also part of the death and birth process, is like shedding old aspects of you. And what would you recommend for people that are like, you know what, all these things that I've done up to this point, I have a lot of regrets and a lot of guilt and a lot of remorse. Is it too late?
I think it all comes down to, if you think about it, it's not really about you.
Ooh. Explain. That's a good point. Tell us more about that.
It's hard to navigate through that, right? There's a lot of shame when it comes to, oh my gosh, like I should know better, or I know better and I need to get out of this funk, or whatever it is. So there's that like self-shame,
Yes.
say. But that always comes down to you thinking about you.
Yeah. Yes.
In reality, we have to think about the impact it has on others. And if I, let's say, quote unquote, if I come correct, right?
Yes.
Then how's that going to affect others?
Mm-hmm.
Probably really well, even from the standpoint of receiving. So I think that's number one, is like just really being self-aware. And that's really hard when you're going through the thick of it.
It is hard.
Yeah. But I would say just keeping in mind that big picture outside of yourself.
Yeah, like if you're feeling the pain of like, I wish I could have leave something better for people or a bigger legacy, but maybe I'm not. Maybe they can just see, instead of looking at them, what can I offer other people? Like, how can I turn this around, or what's something different I can provide here where people can, see a redemption. Because I think redemption is also a big part of that, and then I think that becomes also like a death and rebirth in a sense as well. It's like, it reminds me of like tarot cards. When I pull a death card, people get so scared. I'm like, no, this is a rebirth. Like, this is your chance to start over again.
Yeah.
It's an ending of something, but don't you want that thing to end? Because now you have the chance to turn it around. And, that's something that's part of my legacy that I want to teach people, is like, you can always turn things around for yourself. You don't always have to think that your negative coping mechanisms take over your life, or they create your legacy, and like there's no way of coming out of that.
Yeah, I always had this vision in my head, like when one door closes, how many open? 5 more open. That's kind of like the visual that I get. It's so hard to stay in that realm of positivity when you're really grieving. And that's why I stress so hard, stay in it. You have to stay in the grief and for as long as it really takes.
Yeah, and people want to usually just push past it. They want to feel like, okay, it's been 6 months. I want to move on. Like,
Yeah.
I've gotten clients that have come in for readings. They're like, I'm not over this person or this situation. It's been a year or two, and I'm like, it's okay. Like, you have to accept that, because I feel like they're grieving more of themselves than the other person in a lot of those situations. And this kind of goes into transmuting as well, because transmuting is taking the negative energy, you're taking the grief and then turning it into gold. And I think it really comes from, it's kind of like a legacy project. It's like, where's your purpose in all of this? And I think that when you go through negative situations in life and maybe you didn't handle things well or you have a hard time, but you're like, you know what, I want to create a purpose out of this pain that I've walked through. And I think that's why pain is so important to sit with, and grief, because those things become the purpose that your soul looks out and says, I need to serve the world in this way, in whatever the way that is,
Yeah. How are you of service today? Always step outside of your body. When I was younger, I had this immense amount of fear in public speaking. And I just always admired people who were able to do that so well. I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she said, Dana, the reason why it's so scary to be out there is because you're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the message. And when you think about, concentrate on the message that I'm delivering,
yes,
I'm less it's less about me. I'm less in my body. I'm less shaky, because what I'm focusing on is the message that I have to get across. And if that message is super important, I'm not thinking about myself.
You're thinking about who's gonna.
Where's it landing?
Right? How's it affecting people?
And immediately,
yes,
like my shoulders went down, and it clicked for me. I got it. So whenever I'm thinking about like, oh, I'm in like this sucks, and no shame, like, and no shade either, is like we all go through it. We're human. In this 3D, this is just what we have to go through. But when you step out of your body, step out of like yourself, and oh my god, me, and we start thinking about like, okay, how am I of service to my loved ones or to even strangers?
Yeah,
it's a different world. It's very different.
It is different, and I think when you have that purpose and you find that, and you feel like you impacted positively like one person that day, I think that's what people are really searching for a lot of the time. Because I get that when people come to me for readings too, they're always like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm so lost. I feel like I'm going into a transition, like a death and rebirth, and I don't know what it is. And I'm always like, you got to really look at what you're dealing with, because that is your purpose. Like, your purpose is forged in the pain. Like, through that pain, on the other side of it is like everything that you want to give. And then coming outside of yourself and being like, now it's no longer about me. Now it's about everyone else and what I'm serving. And that really is how you create, I think, probably the strongest legacy that you possibly can, because even if you give one person an idea and that message that feels so important and it gets through and then they make a positive change, that already has a domino impact on people that's positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Grief is not just sadness that this person died or that dream died. Grief is memories.
Yes.
But it's also like, on the other side of it is like hope too. They say that like, when you're grieving like a relationship or a person, your brain, right, is so used to this person being around you, and like you're able to reach out whenever, and like it's just used to that, like the environment. And then when that thing, person, or place has transitioned or is not there anymore, your brain, and then this made me cry. Your brain is basically like these like antennas looking for that.
Oh yes.
You know, it's like beep, 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 and it's just like cannot find it. It's this love that cannot be reached. It's gut wrenching.
Yeah, it's like it's your foundation a lot of times too. I think it's like, how would you recommend when somebody is going through that with a, not necessarily a death, but the ending of a marriage, ending of a relationship or career, some aspect of their life that they were like, this is my foundation. Because a lot of people, I think, hold on to foundation as their sense of identity. Like, I am this in the world. So when that ends, I find a lot of people struggle to find themselves because they feel like they're losing their identity. What advice do you have for that, or what have you noticed with those kinds of situations for people?
Well, I think you already answered that in that question.
Did I?
So I think what happens when you're so rooted in that foundation, when you think you're rooted in that foundation, or it serves then as like an identity, you have attached your identity to that, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that comes in the form of a bit of codependency, right? So how you break quote unquote codependency and also that attachment and the quote unquote, when you said foundation being your identity, in that sense, are you really yourself? Like, do you know who you are? Do you know that that is your foundation? If you feel like that foundation has crumbled, then you feel like you have nothing.
Yeah.
So you have to walk towards rooting yourself so much that when those things transition, or if they happen to leave, we often say, I've been abandoned. And so there's a lot of these crutch words. Not to say they're not true. Every experience is different. But we have to really just think about, okay, where have I attached myself so much to? I think that the most important thing is grieve, and then think to yourself, okay, how am I gonna get back to me?
Is that kind of like, you think what rock bottom is just losing everything that you thought was you, but it was everything that was outside of you?
I personally think so.
That's interesting.
Isn't that crazy?
I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Like,
yeah.
Like, it's hard, it's so painful to sit with. It's so painful when you're the person that you thought was going to be with you for some amount of time, or you thought that you were going to get that job, and you thought, wow, like I thought my career was in this, but you felt absolutely nothing, right? And that's
right.
So sad to like discover those things about yourself. So then, like, what do you do then?
You can get codependent on a job. Like, I never even thought that. You always think of codependency as people, but you're right, it can be anything. You can be codependent on your career field. You can be, I think it's all mixed into image and perception.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to be seen as somebody who is this and has these things. And then I think people also get that confused with legacy too, because they want to be seen as somebody who has, and then that becomes confused with a legacy, which is, what are you giving to people? So I know I probably described that, but how can you kind of talk about that a little bit more in depth, like what the difference is in that?
If you're a dying person, I mean, you can do whatever you want. You can leave a legacy that feels like, this is just performative, and I just want to show people that I built an empire, and this is what I'm going to leave with them. Then great. If it's on the other hand, if your legacy is, hey, like I just want my husband to feel really cared for after I'm gone, and so what she's gonna do is set up like a service or something, somebody have like to come and cook for him after she passes. Like, that is sometimes a legacy project for them. How another person could be taken care of after I pass. And like, Are you really living in your own truth, or are you performative?
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, like if you're showing off your performative versus how you're making people think and feel about them based off of what you're giving to them. And I think a lot of people get those things so confused with each other because a lot of people avoid grief and avoid pain by trying to reach materialistic possessions, trying to acquire wealth, trying to acquire, a good looking thing that, when you put it online it just looks good. But it's like, how does that fill the voids? I don't think it ever really does. I think it's just it's like an escape.
Yeah, we always come back to this. There's not enough space, I think. There are more spaces where we could talk about things like this more and more now. It's called death cafes, where it doesn't need to necessarily be about death itself, but it's a place where people can come together and hold space for one another and give them the floor to talk about whatever it is that they're grieving. And it can be from a person, again, to an ambiguous death.
Wow.
I don't think that there's a million meetups, right? All these things, all these super fun things too. But not enough where we're holding just a little bit of space for people who are really going through it.
I wish there was more of that, because I've noticed when people are going through grief or betrayal trauma or anything, you just need a place to be able to go and just, talk about or just, express what you're going through. And it's hard to find places to do that, but I've never heard of these cafes. How do you find places like that? And are they popular? Like, can you find them in a lot of places, or is it like really rare?
We talk about death and we talk about grief is not commercialized. Perhaps it might become a bit more popular in the sense how therapy became really popular. I would hope so, because I think it gives the opportunity, again, for just people to come together, support one another, talk about grief, and help each other process. You can go online to look for a death cafe near you. There's always someone holding one.
Oh, wow.
Like me. And I think the more you look for those resources, you'll find one. And if there aren't, become an advocate and start your own.
That's so what happens at a death cafe if you go? Is it like a meetup, like we're meeting on this day at these times? Or is it literally a place that's open all day and you can go in? Like, how does that work, and what's the format like?
Yeah, it's just as like any meetup that you would go to. You could run for as long as you'd like. That's up to the host. But yeah, it's just think of it as like you and your friends coming together and having coffee for 2 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool. I've never heard of that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's again, I want to reiterate how important it is to let people experience their journey. Like, as friends, I think sometimes we're very protective. Mm-hmm. As family members can also be very protective of one another. I had a hard conversation with a friend, and you were completely in your truth, let's say.
Okay.
And they came back with a very emotional, I can't believe you would say such a thing to me, da da da. That is their experience. I want people to know that you have to let them experience that anger and like that sadness and that kind of transition. It's not our responsibility. It's our responsibility as in, like, of course, be a good human.
Yeah.
But once you have spoken your truth, you have to let other people experience that as well. And that goes hand in hand with grieving. You have to hold space for people who are grieving. You can't inject yourself all the time with positivity and making it make sense, because it's not going to make sense for the person who is dying, or for the person experiencing that, for the family or the friends who are.
Yeah, and that's a good point about anger too. I think that, anger is it's a villainized emotion, but it's such a healthy human emotion we're all supposed to experience. And I think a lot of the struggle comes from, because it's not talked about, and it's not okay in society to have anger. there's no outlets. Like nobody talks about like here's what you do with anger, here's how you know talk to somebody who's angry, how do you work things out, how do you understand like what's you and what's them. How would you give advice to somebody where part of their grief is experiencing anger, or part of something they're going through just includes anger, and maybe they're angry at you or they're angry at somebody else or even somebody that has passed away? Like how do you help hold space for somebody and kind of not see it, not worry that like you're gonna get part of like that anger, like there's a separation between you and them?
It's a beautiful, beautiful question. I had an experience where a person who was passing away said he was in so much pain physically and didn't know what to do, and said that he didn't want me there. I don't even know why you're here. You would never understand what I'm going through. And immediately in my mind, I was like, I'm such a bad doula. I'm not doing this right. Like, I don't know what to say, what to do. But in that instance, what's been really helpful, I felt, for the patient or for the person who was transitioning was, one, obviously, just being there. A lot of the times you really are in silence.
Okay.
And then my next go-to is really just kind of reiterating their headspace, reiterating what they said to me. So, for example, what I'm hearing is, you're in so much pain. And what I'm hearing is that you don't want me here. And I just want you to know that that's okay. And it's weird, right? Because you're like, well, that person's not giving me advice, but also you just reiterated what I said, so I kind of felt heard.
Yeah.
And that's really what they want, is to somebody to be like, yeah, I may never understand what the exact pain you're going through, but I just want to be heard.
Oh yeah.
So it was fascinating. I take that with me through my everyday life. When a friend is going through a hard time, or like I'm talking to colleagues and I sense frustration, it's always really great to like sort of reiterate what they're saying, so you know that they're properly being heard.
So validating somebody's anger.
Anger is a healthy emotion.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when we're taught that it's, not acceptable, that's when it can, spiral out into something else. But I think that's a great idea, like just validating anger, especially when it comes to heavier stuff or grief or any of that, or just coming to terms with yourself. Sometimes we just want somebody to say, I see that you're angry and that's okay too. I think sometimes we just want to be accepted for our own anger, and that's a really great way of putting that, because I think a lot of people are so afraid of their own anger that they're afraid of others at the same time. And, I wish people knew that, like, anger shouldn't be feared, it should be embraced.
Yeah, and that's when you know that so much of your chakras are blocked, your energy blocks are exactly that, is when you cannot physically express yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and you hold on to when you hold on to negative emotions and you push them away because you're just like, this is not an acceptable place to be emotionally. You're right, it creates blocks, and I think that's where the coping mechanisms come into place. And that's where pain also comes from, is just pushing away negative emotions, and just because those were really what triggers are. It's like they store up, and then when somebody triggers you, it's like they finally just get released, when really they should have just been released in the first place by just holding space for yourself. You have to grieve, I think, negative emotions almost like you would a person, to fully process them, just like you would anybody else in your life.
Yeah. It's a process.
Yeah.
It's a lot of learning. We're always learning, we're never learned. I have a dog, and he is as stubborn as a dog could get. And we finally got him to a place where he was able to learn to not pull on his leash. And at some point, I was so impressed that I called the dog trainer and I said, hey, like, he finally learned how to do this. And my dog trainer immediately sort of, in a corrective tone said, oh no, honey, the dog has never learned anything. He's always learning. It's up to you to keep that momentum.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
almost as if he was training me and my brain to always know that we're, as humans or as animals, like we're always learning how to do things and we're always like evolving. So I always want to let people in my life know that like nothing's ever finite.
Mm-hmm.
And just keep doing what you're doing if it means that it's improving and you're making yourself better.
That's such a great point, and you're right, because we're really here to grow, and we'll be growing the rest of our lives. There's never a finish line to that, and I think that's also part of it is people feel like that's overwhelming, or they're like, well, I want to just be done, and I want to just move on and focus on attaining things, but it goes with the healing process in every regard of life I see where people come into me and they're like, I just want to be done with this. I really want to go after this goal and this dream, and like I'm still stuck here. And I'm like, it's gonna take a while, but you can still go after these things. But sometimes part of attaining is releasing. And people think you can't attain your goals or your dreams if you're just sitting and releasing negative stuff. But it's so important because that opens you up. Like that's where I think blocks and manifesting even come in, is just trying to not look at any of that negative stuff and just go right into the attaining part and not doing the release work. And it's grieving, and it is like a death, but it's also just finally clearing out everything that's blocking you from having what you want in life at the same time.
Yeah, duality. You can have both.
Yes, duality, 100%. Yes.
You can be grieving, but also have the time of your life.
Yes, exactly. You can do both at the same time.
Yeah. So there's no shame in having it one way or the other. It's just the awareness. You have to be so grounded, rooted, and aware of like how you are processing these things.
What kind of advice would you give for somebody that's processing and grieving, but they also still want to go out and enjoy their life at the same time? What kind of advice would you give out? Is there a way to how to do that, or is it just different for every single person?
I mean, I think it's different for every person, and also like you could really, I mean, there's really no concrete advice for things like that, right? I think as long as you're not putting yourself in a limited mindset that let's say if I move on from my dead wife or dead husband in a month, I'm a bad person because I moved on too fast.
Yes.
I mean, that is a limiting belief, it's you're technically doing what is right for you. So I'd say maybe it's a bad example, but I think like whatever you do, whatever decisions you make in life is exactly that. That is just is.
That's true. And sometimes like grieving and that pain is what takes you into the best parts of your life. And I think people don't really realize that. They think that will take you only to darker parts of your life. But reality is that like there are things like doing this. Like if I didn't go through some of the hard things I've gone through in my life, I wouldn't be trying to go for something like this now that like I'm really excited about.
Yeah. And that's the stigma of death. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you have any advice for people that still have stigmas of death and how it holds you back, and learning about how to see that it only propels you forward in many different ways that you wouldn't have seen before? Mm-hmm. How would you describe that?
I think I'm gonna go back to saying death is all around and it's going to come. So you could fear it all your life. Like you could just be in that bubble, right? And not go out and not drive and not do half the things, but you do it anyway. But I think the mindset you have to be in is, in reality, yes, when you're here in the now, it's really just like the most sobering experience because you're not going to have this tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, every day really is a gift, and I think you don't learn that until you become sobered up by just experiencing something or grieving something, and you realize like this is special.
That's what I would leave is like at any crossroads, remember that nothing is forever.
Yep.
And truly be in gratitude that, you're able to open your eyes and like be in your current body, and that you have freedom of choice. And that choice is like, it's an everyday thing. Like you have the power to create those choices.
Yes, I believe so too. What about so let's say you're like, all right, I want to make these changes. Like I want to let go of anger. I want to let go of holding a grudge, but I'm really struggling. What would you recommend for somebody that's just they have the intention, but they're struggling with being able to actually pursue it?
This may sound a little bit standoffish maybe, but it's like how badly do you want it?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
You will always do and make decisions in what you want to do. Whether that's bad or that's good, you're gonna do what you want to do, right?
Right.
It just depends on how badly you want it. You want to get so badly out of like terrible eating habits. If you want it badly, you'll do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking for everyone, but I feel like there's not one person that I saw like when they want it badly, they go and get it.
That's true.
Yeah. That's all I have to say about it.
That's a good point. Yeah, because if you do it, you'll find a way. Like you just become determined to find a way.
Yeah, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, that makes sense. With grieving anything in life, like I have people come in who are really stuck, but I think fear is what makes us afraid to let go. Like I think sometimes when we hold on to something we're grieving in a negative way, it's because that's what feels safe to do. And it's like you have to almost convince your mind that holding on to a grudge or anger or resentment, how safe does it actually keep you?
Yeah, it's familiarity.
Yeah.
We feel safe in that knowing.
Yes.
It's very hard.
It's really hard. Yeah. But it's possible. Like I know you doing hypnotherapy, I've done hypnotherapy too. I feel like that stuff helps a lot with there's so many modalities out there where it's just like you can process just the one emotion or the one viewpoint you're struggling with releasing, and then that lets it go too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, Dana. That was really insightful and helpful, and I feel like we learned a lot today. And now we're gonna
for having me.
Thank you. We're gonna do some fast questions. What's your favorite thing to eat when you're grieving? Is that
the things that like make my soul feel good. So I'll probably reach for some Korean food or like hangover food. It really feels like that. Like sadness and grieving makes me feel like it's like you drink so much and you feel completely hungover, and you're like, oh my god, I need something that's gonna satiate me.
What's your favorite thing to impulse buy?
If we're getting witchy here, I'd probably get some more things to add to my altar.
Ooh, okay. I like that.
Yeah.
What's your favorite self-care thing to do, activity?
I love to biohack. Like, utilizing red light therapy at home has been really great.
Oh, I've heard of that. Is that like you can buy those like they're like little like blanket looking things. They have red lights that come out of them.
Yeah, there's so many different red light therapy like forms you can get. Yeah.
Okay.
Whether that's through like a blanket or like an actual light you can hang.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's great for you.
Cool. What's your favorite way to create space for yourself?
Any point I could get some alone time in, whether that's like journaling or like taking myself on a date or going out for a walk, just alone. You don't necessarily have to do all of that stuff with everyone at all times. So just having that space for myself, I think, is like been so healing also and important.
I love taking myself out on dates.
Yeah.
I actually like going to restaurants by myself, and a lot of people feel like that's scary, but I think it's really relaxing.
Yeah, and I think it's like becoming more and more common now,
Oh, yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah.
I think everyone should experience being their own best friend.
Yeah, yeah. I think it also makes the healing and grieving process a million times easier when you're your own best friend, because you support yourself through it. and then people mirror you. So when you do it, I think people know better how to mirror you to help you with that process as well.
Yes.
Yes.
I always say there's like a downside to that is like when you love your me time so much and like somebody comes across to like, hey, come out, you have to be like, all right, well, what's on the table for me to put my pants on? And if it's like a really good one, and be like, all right, I'm putting on my jacket.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Well, thank you so much, Carla, for having me on.
Thank you so much.
I can be found on Instagram. I'll put my email like on screen.
Yeah, if you guys want to contact Dana, we'll have her information here, and you guys can keep in contact with her and reach out to her if you have any questions about what she does as a death doula, and maybe any questions you have for yourself as well of how it can help you. So, great. Well, thank you so much, you guys. This was my first episode of the Starry Night Inside podcast. Please check us out for more episodes. There are more coming, and I hope you enjoyed what you guys heard today. So thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.